Hi, I'm Dongxiang. Welcome to Dig Into China, where we explore China in depth to reveal unique perspectives. Lately, we've seen trade tensions flare up between the United States and its allies. Could this create an opening for Xi Jinping to dodge the tightening global squeeze on China? I don't think so. No matter what moves Trump makes, I'd argue China can't sidestep this worldwide containment. Today, let's explore why the world seems to be closing in on China. For years, when we've talked about this global encirclement, the conversation has usually revolved around ideology and diplomacy. After sanctions from places like the US and Europe hit China, you'd hear patriotic voices, those little pinks, claiming it's the American empire out to crush us. On the flip side, dissidents would frame it as a showdown over values and beliefs. But today, I want to set aside that old diplomatic and ideological lens. Let's shift gears and look at this through an economic perspective, why this global containment feels inevitable. Let me be clear. When I say global encirclement, I'm not just talking about the usual players, democratic West like Europe and America. This includes third world nations too, even Pakistan. Now, in China's official storytelling, Pakistan is the iron pack, a loyal brother as solid as steel. Some even see it as a junior partner, with China calling the shots. Yet in 2024, this so-called iron brother took China to the WTO with 5 trade lawsuits. And it's not just Pakistan. Russia, another supposed steadfast ally, also clashed with China over trade in 2024, especially on things China's long been good at, like furniture and electric cars. Russia hit Chinese goods with steep tariffs. Add to that countries across Latin America and Africa, and you see a pattern emerging. Data from Peking University's Institute of International Development backs this up. Year after year, the trade lawsuits piling up against China keep growing. In 2024 alone, China faced nearly 200 investigations, a record high, unlike anything we've seen before. Dig into these 200 cases and some fascinating details pop up. For one, China was the most targeted country in 2024. No shocker there. But here's the kicker. Out of about 400 trade investigations launched by the WTO that year, China was named in nearly half, almost 200. Even more telling, 117 of those came from developing nations. So the loudest grumbles about China trade practices aren't coming from the big Western powers, the US, the EU, or Canada, like you might expect. Instead, it's these third world countries, some of China's so-called iron buddies, who've got real gripes in 2024. Meanwhile, Beijing keeps touting tales of friendship with Russia, Pakistan, and Africa, all while deflating domestic frustrations onto the US. They filter the news, so most folks don't even hear about these trade spats with Chinese good brothers in the developing world. So why are these brother nations turning on China? How can they smile and shake hands with Xi Jinping, pocket hefty Chinese loans, then quietly file complaints behind closed doors? Are they playing China for a fool, treating Xi like an easy mark? The answer lies in China's trade setup. You've probably caught wind of this in the news. China's trade surplus, the gap between what it sells and what it buys, has been enormous lately. Back in 2018, that surplus started ballooning, and by 2024, it hit a staggering new peak, nearly $1 trillion US. That's $1 trillion more in exports than imports, a figure unmatched anywhere else. In just 5 years, China's slice of the global trade surplus shot from 17.5% to 36.6%. Here in China, plenty of folks cheer this as a triumph, and they say, our surplus is so big the world can't live without Chinese goods. How powerful we are. But this giant surplus isn't all good news. It's stirring up a lot of troubles. Usually when we hear complaints about it, they are coming from the US, especially with Trump making noise about it lately. Trump's been vocal, pushing to shrink the trade gap with China. He says China's raking up this huge surplus with us. They are taking us for a ride. But honestly, for countries like the US and the EU, running a trade deficit with China isn't their biggest headache. It ties into how currency and trade work together. Think about it. The world's top reserve currencies are the US dollar, the euro, and the British pound. Together, they make up over 80% of global reserves. That currency dominance lets the US and EU handle big trade deficits. It's almost built into the system. Take US-China trade. China sells far more to the US than it buys back, a classic surplus. But it's not just China. The US runs deficit with nearly every country. They are always buying more than they are selling. So how hasn't the US gone broke? Simple, the dollar. China's surplus with the US turns into dollar reserves. The US prints money. Folks treat it like gold, and that smooths out the imbalance. It's the same with the EU. That's why China's stirring up, sitting on piles of dollars and treasury bonds. Some might argue, hold on, doesn't that mean the US is coming out ahead? Isn't China getting fleeced? They just print cash and get our goods. Beijing's line is that a $100 bill costs 17 cents to make, yet it buys $100 worth of stuff from other countries. Isn't that outright plunder? Not quite. If the US couldn't print money to ease the trade gap, then China and the US would need a perfect balance. Sell $100 worth, buy $100 worth. To pull that off, China would have to slash exports to the US and ramp up imports big time. Easier said than done. Boosting Chinese buying power would mean letting the renminbi climb way up, but that would jack up the price of Chinese goods, and isn't China's edge all about low costs? Push prices too high and exports could tank, along with the economy. So Beijing's claim that dollar dominance is hurting China doesn't really add up. Mind you, Trump's notion that you can keep the dollar king and still shrink the deficit doesn't fly either. The dollar's global status comes from those big US trade imbalances. Balance everything out, and where do all those extra dollars come from? Now step away from giants like the US and the EU and look at the smaller countries. That's where the trouble really brews. China's surplus isn't just with the West. In the last 5 years, as that surplus soared, it grew 1.2 times with ASEAN, tripled with Central Asia's 5 nations, and rose 1.3 times with the EU. With the US, it only crept up 30%. Back in 2011, China was buying more than it sold to places like South Korea, Africa, ASEAN, Central Asia, and Japan. By 2024, only South Korea still fits that mold. Some of this comes from rerouting trade, selling to Vietnam, say, then on to the US to dodge tariffs. But China's real surplus with these smaller countries is growing too. So how do they handle it? If China sells $100 worth to Pakistan or Nigeria, but only buys back 20, that leaves a big gap year after year. Look at Pakistan. China's trade surplus there hovers between $10 and $20 billion annually. How do you square that? You can't just take Pakistan rupees like you do dollars or euros. No one's banking on those. The rupee is barely useful globally. And with Pakistan, the shaky government, it could crash any day. Those savings would be toast. So here is what China's done historically. Sell $100 worth to Pakistan, buy back 20. And the $80 difference? They don't take rupees. They hand Pakistan an $80 loan. Pakistan borrows to buy more Chinese stuff and it evens out. That's the big money splashing we've heard about. But that trick's wearing thin. When countries like Sri Lanka started going bust, it got harder to keep up. China lent them cash, hoping their economy would take off and they'd pay it back in dollars earned elsewhere. Instead, they got the loans, took the goods, and it didn't grow. Now they are drowning in debt on the brink of collapse. Pakistan is a case in point. Its yearly trade adds up to a net loss of over $20 billion, more than half from China. Even without China, they are still in the red. Where is the money to repay China? Since 2023, China has been pulling back on these loans. In 2023 and 2024, lending to third world nations dropped. And just like that, these countries turned. They are saying, you've stopped the lending, but you keep racking up surplus with us. Aren't you just taking us for all we've got? And I can't keep up. Pakistan's losing $20 billion a year with a GDP of just $300 billion. How long can they last? They can't print money to offset it. Over time, they will collapse. That's why they are suing China now. Why even a place like Niger is pushing Chinese officials out. What's China's dream fix? Upgrade industries, focus on high-tech, ditch the old stuff, keep a fat surplus with the US and the EU by selling more and buying less, stockpiling dollars and euros. But with third world nations, flip it. Buy heaps from them, cut exports. Chinese clothes shouldn't come from China. They should come from Pakistan or Bangladesh. That's not always bad. It could be good. Let those countries turn their surplus into renminbi and save it up. That's what the US did, move the low-end manufacturing out and balance trade with the dollar. But China's not on that path. Some might say, wait, Made in China 2025 is nearly done, right? Even the US says so. And electric cars are booming. Sure, high-tech exports like electric vehicles are up, but it's not the full picture. While high-tech grows, low-end manufacturing is chugging along too, maybe even faster. China now holds 64.8% of the global surplus in manufactured goods, up from 30% 5 years ago. That's a problem. It's fighting the US and the EU at the top and scraping with Pakistan at the bottom. When Pakistan, a country with a per capita GDP of $1,365, sues China at the WTO, we should wonder, how's China even rivaling a place like that? 5 lawsuits. Why is China still ducking it out with Pakistan? Shouldn't those low-end jobs go their way? But China hasn't let go. Traditional manufacturing hasn't evolved with the upgrades. It's not like electric cars rolled in and swept low-end work away. High-ends rising, the low-ends expanding too. For ages, China's bragged about standing alone, making everything from screws to cars, laughing at America's hollowed-out factories. But is that full self-reliance worth celebrating? I don't think so. Why is it like this? Lots of reasons. Uneven skills across the huge population, many stuck in low-end jobs, fallout from the pandemic. But the real root, I'd say, is Xi Jinping's supply-side obsession. He's fixated on production, clinging to that Marxist idea that it's everything. That's left China with a wild overcapacity. This isn't sustainable. A massive surplus isn't a win, nor is making everything yourself. It's dragging everyone down. The big Western players, they are fine. They complain loudest because they can, and Beijing highlights them. But they balance it with currency. So the hit's not too bad. Who's really hurting? Small countries trading with China and the Chinese people. Those small nations are in a bind, facing debt crisis or eating the imbalance raw. And the Chinese workers, you are slaving away to outcompete a country with a per capita GDP of $1,300. Your job, your pay is not going anywhere great. It's a mess for everyone. As I said up top, with a surplus this big, encirclement's coming. People need to survive too. The big money splashing hit it for a while, softening the squeeze. But by 2024, with that cash flow fading, the cracks are showing and they are starting to burst. Global containment, it's already on the horizon. Thank you so much for watching. If you find this video helpful, please like it, drop a comment below, and hit the subscribe button right here. It really helps YouTube suggest my video to others. I'll be back with more content soon. Until then, be well.